Welcome to the Diligent Woman Podcast, where Christian women let go of their guilt and step out in confidence by bringing God into every part of the day, learning by examples in Scripture, applying simple principles, and trusting the Lord with it all. I am Angela Legg of thediligentwoman.com, and I welcome you to grow in grace and truth one step at a time. Let's get started. And welcome back to the Diligent Woman Podcast. We are in season 5, where we are studying men and women from Scripture, and we are learning from the great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us. That's referred to over in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And what is it that all of these people are witnesses of? Well, they're all witnesses of the story that God has written and laid out from the beginning of time that impacts every one of us still today. They're not witnessing their own stories. They're witnessing God's story. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and how that story is being played out and written for our benefit. So this week we are doing episode 512. That's episode 512. And we are looking at the story of Abraham after Isaac. If you'll go back to episode 507, that is when we talked about Abraham's life before Isaac was born. And so we start our story today, and we've still got a lot of ground to cover. But we start our story today in Genesis chapter 21. And so far, in our previous episode, we have looked at Abraham's faith as it is growing and the different circumstances he's been in, how he's interacted with God, and how God has shown up for Abraham and reiterates over the years, and in the space of time that we're given for his story to have started, we're given 25 years up to the point where we are now. And over that course of 25 years, God has reiterated his promises to Abraham in a variety of ways, in a variety of times. Most recently, he's done so just before our events of today with Isaac being born. He comes a year before Isaac is born, and he reminds Abraham of the promise that he has given, and that now that's going to be fulfilled, and says, a year from today, your wife will have a child that is yours. Your wife, Sarah, who is in her old age, will have a child. And so starting in Genesis chapter 21, it says, Then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. And it's worth reminding ourselves, we also talked about Sarah in her episode where we've looked at her life and all the things that have gone on for her. And God made these promises to her. And in Hebrews chapter 11, her continuing to love her husband and to be with him and to continue to trust that maybe a child will come, and to behave in all the ways that could make that happen, even when she's absolutely convinced that her body is not capable of bearing a child. That her behavior through that course of 25 years, for the most part, is counted to her as faith, that she trusted in God's promises, and here he is fulfilling that promise to her. It's been 24 years since the promise. It'll be 25 years when it is fulfilled. And even with all of the episode with Hagar and Ishmael, since then, which was 11 years in, we've had a long time since then. And she has continued to trust that God is going to keep this promise. She doesn't understand how, but God remembers her, and he keeps his promise to her. And over in Hebrews, God says that she was faithful to trust him in that. Doesn't mean she didn't have questions. Doesn't mean that it wasn't hard, but she was faithful, and as was Abraham. So here they get their son Isaac, and Isaac is born. And that's all it says. In verses 1 through 3. Isaac is born. They call him Isaac. That's what God told him to call him. And that's it. We're not told about the delivery. We're not told anything about her pregnancy. We're not told any details. just that God kept his promise, because that's the point that matters for us. Abraham also, back in chapter 17, God added to the covenant, added a different part of the covenant for Abraham and for his people, and he added circumcision to the covenant. So now we have the covenant that is going to be physically acknowledged through circumcision. Circumcision is this physical action that they're going to take, and it is going to be shown on every man who is a part of Abraham's lineage, that they are part of the covenant that God has promised to make this great nation, to become this great people who is going to bless all people. And God tells them to circumcise the men, and any boys that are born, they need to be circumcised on day 8. And at that time, Abraham was in his old age, and he was circumcised, and all of the men of his household, and Ishmael along with him. So they obeyed the covenant then, got everyone brought into the covenant, and now here Abraham is being obedient to that and having his son circumcised. So he did that as God had commanded, it says in verse 4. So now Abraham is 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah says in verse 6 that God has made laughter for me. So the laughter of doubt that she had before when she's told that she'd have a son becomes laughter of joy. And it's God who has done that, because everyone who hears will laugh with me, because it will be amazing. And you can just hear the chuckles and the joy of a woman in her old age being given this gift that she longed for. And she said, "Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." Because you can just imagine, as doubtful as they were that this could actually come true, everyone around them would have to think even more so, right? Abraham and Sarah have direct conversations and these things to back up their reason for believing that it will happen. All these other people don't have that. They're just hearing whatever Abraham and Sarah have to say about it. So here they are. Isaac is born. And in verse 8, we jump forward to he is grown and he is weaned. And Abraham has a celebration. We talked about this in Hagar's story. If you go back and listen to the episode for Hagar, and that is, let me find that, episode 509. You can go find Hagar's story where we talked about this, where at this point, teenager Ishmael responds to this celebration for his younger brother Isaac with mocking. And Sarah tells Abraham that she won't have him here. She's not going to have the son of that Egyptian woman. He's not going to have him here, and it giving trouble to Isaac. She says, "Drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac." And God confirms this. Abraham is distraught. He's sad to lose Ishmael this way. This is his son who he's raised and cared for. And it's not the son of promise, but it is his son, more so than any other heir that he has had to this point. And Abraham cares for him. God acknowledges that, but God says, listen to your wife. Listen to Sarah. I'm going to take care of the maid and her son. They will become a great nation. Because he is your descendant. These are other nations that are going to be blessed because they are descendants of Abraham. They're just not this chosen line that God has a purpose set up for. So Abraham, again, is obedient. He gives them provisions, and he lets them leave. And then, again, their story while they are out in the wilderness, we tell that over in Hagar's story. So go over there and see how God dealt with Hagar in that moment. So chapter 21, then we jump forward to, again, we've got Abraham. He's living in this same area, and it comes about this time that Abimelech, this is the same Abimelech from chapter 20, when even though Isaac has been promised and here comes the son that you're going to have, Abraham gets into a bit of a pickle again kind of his faith not being as strong as it could. He's worried about Abimelech taking Sarah away from him, and so they tell the lie again, and it gets him into a problem with this Philistine king. And it's that circumstance where God comes to Abimelech in a dream, and he tells him that you're going to die because of this situation. And Abimelech is appalled, and he's upset with Abraham for creating this problem. But it apparently didn't completely ruin their ability to work together. So after a period of time, it's been a year, over a year, because Isaac's now been born. It's been several years now. He's been weaned. So we're a few years down the road, but they all still live in fairly close proximity to one another, relatively speaking. And we see here in chapter 21 and verse 22 that now about this time, Abimelech and his commander of his army, his commander's name is Phicol, they come to Abraham and they want to make a covenant. They acknowledge that obviously God is with Abraham in all that he does. And so they want to make a covenant with Abraham that he won't have any trouble with them. He won't cause any trouble, that they will show kindness according to the kindness that Abimelech showed him. He didn't kill him for lying about him and getting him into trouble. He didn't take his wife, and he provided for them, and he let him leave. So Abimelech has been kind, even though Abraham kind of created an issue. And Abimelech says, "But according to the kindness that I have shown to you, you shall show to me and to the land in which you have sojourned." And Abraham agrees to that. He swears to that. But he also tells Abimelech about the problem that he's been having with the wells that are being dug. The Philistines keep filling them in. And he tells Abimelech about this, and he says, he goes, "I have this problem because of the well of water, which the servants of Abimelech, they'd seized this well of water." And Abimelech's like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." But when Abraham goes to fulfill the covenant with Abimelech, he brings animals to give in offering, and he sets 7 ewe lambs aside. And Abimelech's like, "What are these? What are these for? This is in addition to the covenant that we're making. What is this?" And so Abraham says, "I want you to witness this well that I'm digging and acknowledge that it's mine. And I am paying you these ewes to do that." So we're going to circumvent this problem where before Abimelech had said, "I didn't know what had been done to the well, and you didn't say anything to me about it, and today's the first I've heard of it." Well, Abraham's going to take care of that problem. Now he's going to go, "Okay, so you're going to stay right here. We're digging this well. I want you to acknowledge that this well is here, that we have dug it, and that it belongs to us." And Abimelech makes that covenant. And so he calls that place Beersheba, because this is where they had taken that oath. He plants a tamarisk tree, and and here it says that Abraham called on the name of the Lord. The idea, I think, again, we've talked about this before, going all the way back to Seth. This seems to be a more formal form of worship. So this is a place that is made for worship that Abraham sets aside, because that seems to be the connection in these contexts of calling on the name of the Lord. It's not that this is the only time that Abraham has ever worshiped. It's just he calls on the name of the Lord in this place, in this way, by making a specific effort. And so here in the area of the Philistines, here in the middle of the world of the Philistines, is a place where God is being worshipped. Abraham is allowed to thrive, and he lives in the area of the Philistines for a long time. So he doesn't go back to Hebron. He stays here for a while. And just as a note, this is going to be the same Abimelech that Isaac is going to have to deal with later whenever there's a famine and God says, "Don't go to Egypt." Instead, they go to the land of the Philistines. They go back to Gerar. And this same Abimelech is the one that Isaac will deal with many years later. So this Abimelech's going to be very familiar with Abraham and his family and all of their circumstances. So these two areas really intermingle with one another quite a bit. So now we get to chapter 22. We have Abraham being a good man of character, a good man of faith, but now God is going to test him. That's what it flat out says in chapter 22 and verse 1. After it came about after these things, God tested Abraham. So God tells Abraham, get up, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah. And it's of note that the word Moriah means that is chosen by Jehovah. Sorry. So go to Moriah, or go to the land that I'm showing you. This is going back to the same scenario that we had in Genesis chapter 12. God says, you go to the land of Moriah, which is where I'm going to show you where to go. And you're going to offer your son as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. We're not told which mountain. He's going to somewhere that God is going to send him to go. And on one of those mountains, God will tell him at that time which one that he wants him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. And the next verse says, so Abraham rose early. He obeys God. His son is older. I'm not told how old at this point, just said sometime later. He's old enough that he's able to help carry the elements for the sacrifice, and he is able to conceive the idea of what's necessary for that and to question his father about it. So he's not a toddler, most likely, but Abraham obeys. So we see a great deal of trust. This promise being made and seeing Isaac born seems to have crossed over from where he still wasn't sure about his living and God's promises being fulfilled just as recent as a year before his son is born, to now God says, take your son and you're going to sacrifice him. And Abraham goes. He takes his son, they saddle his donkey, they take 2 young men with them, and he takes Isaac. He's got wood for the offering, and they go 3 days. And after 3 days, Abraham raises his eyes and he sees the mountain that obviously God is telling him to go to. It doesn't say that, but that's what God told him he was going to do. So he raised his eyes and he sees from a distance the mountain he needs to be on. So 3 days from Beersheba. And he tells the 2 young men, stay here with the donkey, and the lad and I are going to go over here, which tells me it's not going to be super far because they've got to carry the wood to the area. So, but they're going to obviously go, and it says it is a distance away. And he's going to go at least far enough that those young men are not in any position to stop him. He tells them to stay. We're going to go worship, and then we'll come back. So Abraham took the wood, and that's all it says. He leaves the men. He walks with his son to wherever he is going to on this mountain. And it just says in verse 6 of chapter 22, Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife, so the 2 of them walked on together. Just walks on. No conversation, no question mark. He tells those young men that they're going to worship. There's no record of them asking about an animal for that. But then as they're walking along, Isaac says, my father. He says, we have the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering. And I do think it is helpful and encouraging to understand that God did give us an insight into Abraham's frame of mind. It's not here, but over in Hebrews, God gives us commentary on how Abraham could do this. And it's not as accounted as a negative. It's still part of the faith that Abraham had. And it says that in verse 17 of Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up sacrifice, and he who had received the promises was offering up his only begotten son. It was he to whom it was said, "In Isaac your descendant shall be called." He considered that God is able to raise people even from the dead, from which he also received him back as a type, which that gives away our end of our story, but I think we all know this. So in this moment, Abraham answering his son that God will provide, he recognizes that he may have to kill his son, but he expects that God who gave him this son can give this son back to him. He's thinking, well, I know if I kill him, God will raise him from the dead. I don't know what experience he's had in his life. I don't know if there have been other resurrections. We're not told that at this point. But he believes God is capable. He knows who God is. His faith is so much so that he is certain that if he kills his son, God can resurrect him. So he says God will provide the lamb. And so the two walk on together. And they come to the place of which God had told him. And Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He binds his son, lays him on the altar on top of the wood. I don't know if Isaac is awake or if he has put Isaac to sleep. No idea. There's no indication of Isaac in the middle of any of this. He's there, and this is Abraham's obedience that's being considered. So Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son, in verse 10. He has every intention of killing his son because God said to do so, and he trusts that God will give him his son back because he trusts that because God fulfilled the promise of the son, the promise of everything else will also come to be, and that can only happen through this son. But the messenger of the Lord calls out and tells him to stop. Do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing. And the Lord says, "For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." This was the test. Was, do you fear God enough that everything that you have, you would willingly give? And Abraham's heart said yes. So God stops him, and as Abraham looks up, there's a ram caught in the bushes around him. And God has provided the animal for the sacrifice. And they go on, and he offers up the burnt offering in the place of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said, in this day, in the mount of the Lord, it will be provided. And it, kind of reminds me a bit of Hagar in the wilderness. She also says that she calls it a place where God is a God who sees, because he provided for her and saw her need and took care of it. And this is a similar thing here. This is a grand moment. He declares, he calls it, "In the mount of the Lord, it will be provided." So the name of that place is "The Lord will provide." I find it fascinating that this place is not referred to anywhere else in Scripture. The event is, but the place is not. Can you imagine what we would do if we had that place? It would become another spot of worship that God did not call for. We don't need the place. We need to know what happened there, and God has given us that. So Abraham, before he leaves, the messenger of God comes again and gives him a message that is, "The Lord declares the Lord." He says, "By myself I have sworn, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son, indeed I will greatly bless you, and I will greatly multiply your seed as the stars of the heavens and as the sand which is on the seashore, and on your seed shall possess the gate of their enemies. In your seed all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." And this is a true thing about Abraham all the way up to this point. We wouldn't be at this point if Abraham had not been obedient all the way here, but he has continued to behave even to this. And now this brings all of those covenant moments back together. That takes us back to chapter 12, verses 2 through 3, chapter 13, verses 14 through 17, chapter 15 and verse 5. All of these are where he told him to look and count the stars, or look and see the dust at your feet. He's reminding him, I've already promised you this. It is still true. This is still going to happen. And then just as recently as chapter 17 and verses 1 through 8, when he gave him his new name and said, you are going to be the father of nations. Here God swears by himself, for I have sworn. Because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, this is going to come true. You have proven yourself to me, and I will continue to prove myself to you. Because you have obeyed my voice. And if you go over to Hebrews 11 and read the context in verses 8 through 19, where you see all of Abraham's faith, going when God said to go, all the way through this event, it's all because Abraham has his eye on something far beyond the life he's living on earth. He sees a promise beyond the nation that he will not get to see in his lifetime. Beyond all of those things, he trusts that he has a heavenly home somewhere with the Lord, that exists. And that faith is what he's walking on. So be sure and check out Hebrews 11 and to fill in that whole context. Make those cross references. Go see what God tells you about Abraham well after the fact, looking back in hindsight, looking at Abraham and where that fits into the story. Read this story with that view from that context of Hebrews 11. This is what God tells you it means. So read this happening through the eyes of how God interprets that and the meaning he places on that. So we come to the end of the chapter 22, and there's just a little bit of information that Abraham learns. He learns that his brother, all the way over in the Ur of the Chaldeans, the brother Nahor that he left over there when he and his father and Lot all left and came to Canaan, his brother is there, and he has learned that his brother's wife has given him children. And the youngest of those children, by the name of Bethuel, that man has a daughter named Rebekah. And he also learns about the other wife and the other children that his brothers had. And this information is just placed in the back of his mind until he needs it. So we come to chapter 23, and Sarah dies. And again, we show that Abraham still is a man without a country of his own. He is a nomad who roams in these areas. And in this situation, he comes here. He comes back to the area where we're told that he first stopped, there in Mamre. And he comes back to that, and he's mourning for his wife. And he speaks to the sons of Heth that live in that area. And he goes, I'm a stranger, I'm a sojourner among you, but he wants a place to bury his wife. Will you give me a place that I can bury my wife? And they said, yes, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our graves. None of us will refuse you his grave for burying your dead. How much respect has Abraham garnered over his time here in Canaan, that these people call him a prince among them, and that they will give up their own place of burial if he wants it. So he gets up and he bows to them, and he chooses his place, and he chooses a place for Sarah to be buried, and now he owns that. So while Abraham in his lifetime will not ever own the whole of Canaan, there are places scattered all throughout Canaan that are these small pieces of land that he has paid for because he's a man of honor, man of respect for the other people who live in the area, and he has purchased those places for various things. He has the well that is over in the area of the Philistines, and now this burial place is here for Sarah, and he buries her here, and later he will be buried in this same place. So he pays for that place, and it is his possession. And it says down in verse 18 of chapter 23, and that it is to Abraham for a possession in the presence of the sons of Heth before all who went in at the gate of his city. So he buries his wife, and he mourns for her. And it's worth noting, Sarah dies at the age of 127. So she got 37 years with her son. So that means that Abraham is 137 and Isaac is 37 at this point. So that's where they are. She dies, she's buried. And then in chapter 24, Abraham, he's old, he's advanced in years, and now he's worried about his son, Isaac. And in chapter 24, in verses 3 and 4, he tells us that he doesn't want his son to marry a woman from the land of Canaan. He asks his servant in verse 2, the oldest servant in his household, who appears to be his steward, who has the care of all things in his household. He asks him to swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live. The implication being that this man, if Abraham dies and Isaac's not yet married, this man would be responsible for getting Isaac married. And he doesn't want that to be from the daughters of the Canaanites. And so in verse 4, he says, you will go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. I want you to go back to my brother. Go back to Ur and find a wife for my son. And the servant says, to go get the wife. The servant says, suppose the woman is not willing to follow me. Should I take your son back to the land where you came from? And Abraham emphatically says, no. Do not take my son back there. He says in verse 7, the Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land. He will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. He says, do not take my son back there. This is the land that he's promised to me and to my son. This is where my son will stay. But God will provide. He's going to send an angel ahead of you so that you can find the right woman for my son. He says, then, but if a woman will not come back with you, you're free of my oath. That's not on you. She's not a part of that. She can only do what's freely her choice. But he says, but do not take my son back there. So God is confident, or Abraham is confident that God will provide the wife not from the people of Canaan. He's emphatic that Isaac is not to go back to his people, obviously being the temptation to stay with his own people. He's supposed to make a home here. And the servant places his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swears to him concerning this matter. This is a trustworthy man, and we will look at his story in another episode as we try to round out basically the world of Abraham here in a few episodes. But that servant goes at the behest of Abraham to find a wife. The story is he does. He finds one, and it is Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, that youngest son. And he gets her, and she comes back, and it says at the end of the chapter that when she comes to Isaac, this is chapter 24, verse 67, then the servant tells Isaac everything that happened. Isaac brings her into his mother's tent, and he takes her, and she becomes his wife, and he loved her. And thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Finding a wife, just go back again to the first chapter of Scripture when God creates man. There was something lacking. It's not good for man to be alone. And Isaac has been alone, and he has been mourning the loss of his mother. And the cure for that was a wife. So God provided. Just as he did for Adam, now Isaac has been provided for. So now we will talk more about the servant in one of in another episode. And then going forward, we will look at things in the world of Isaac, and we will look at Isaac and learn from him, and we will learn about Rebekah in those circumstances. But in this story, this is Abraham's providing for his son, and he's careful to do it from someone who is part of his family, not from the people of Canaan. He's more worried about his son, his blood, not having the blood of these people that are going to be run out, not tying him to these people. He's supposed to live among them, not be one of them. And so he creates that by going and finding a wife for Isaac. So now we jump forward to chapter 25. And life goes on after Sarah. Abraham is old. I don't know if he takes this wife before the circumstances in chapter 24, because he does live for a time after that. He lives for 38 years after Sarah dies. But so I don't know at what point he sends the servant to go do that. We just know that because we know how old everyone is when he dies. And at this point, when he dies at 175, Isaac is 75 years old. And we know at what age Isaac has his sons. That's at age 60. So it's fairly close to sending him to do that, probably not long after Sarah dies. And I just don't know at what point he took this wife. But either way, he takes another wife, and by her name is Keturah. He takes her as wife, and she bears him more children. You've got Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua and Zimram. And you see who these sons are, the sons of Midian. And it says in verse 5 that Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. None of these sons inherit directly from Abraham, but he provides for them while he was alive. So there's no inheritance after his death for these, but Isaac gets everything. But while he's alive, he takes good care of these sons, but he sends all of them away to the east, the same way that Ishmael was sent away. So none of them are here to cause trouble for Isaac and Isaac's legacy in Canaan. At least not right now. Because we know that all these people are going to become nations in their own right, and God's people are going to interact with quite a few of them. So, verse 7, these are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175. So again, he's 175. This means Isaac is now 75 years old. And in verse 8, Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, an old man and satisfied. Don't you want to be able to say that? To have lived your life, ripe old age, and you're satisfied. What a blessing. And he was gathered to his people. And then his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, bury him in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, facing Mamre. He gets buried in the same cave where Sarah is buried. And that is the field that he purchased to bury Sarah. And that's all we're told. From that point on, we know nothing else that happened with his wife and those other sons and their story, because that's not the story God is telling now. We know that God took care of his other sons and caused them to grow into great nations. The fact that many of these are names of nations that we're going to deal with later shows that God did the same, just as he did with Ishmael. God took care of those who were descended from Abraham. So what a great man. What a great character for us to learn from. He is referred to over and over again because of his faith, because of his constancy for the Lord. And we are blessed through his lineage, not because of blood, but because of the promise God kept repeating over and over again. So I hope that you learn from Abraham and you look at him as someone who's just like you, whose faith had to grow. He had to come to a point where his faith was such that God could test him and expect a certain result. Think again of Job and the first chapters of Job, where Satan comes and asks to have permission to test Job, because he thinks that Job will give up and he will speak against God. And God says, I don't think so. You can test him. Just don't kill him. These are all things God is waiting for us to show that we do know that he is God and that he is faithful. And he is there for all of those who believe in him. That is what faith is that who God is. And the way that we basically reiterate that to ourselves is by showing it to God every day as living a life as a living sacrifice, as Paul talks about in Romans chapter 12, 1-2. Isn't Abraham a good example of that? Isn't he a witness to one who walked in the ways of the Lord in the story that God is telling about salvation and our need for him? Doesn't Abraham witness that to us, that God is one who will keep his promises? That God keeps his promises to those who diligently seek him. Abraham walked with God, talked to God, had questions. He asked questions. He asked for mercy. He hoped that he could stop the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah if there were just 10 people who were faithful. And we know from our lesson on Lot and on Lot's wife and daughters, there were not 10. There was one. It was just Lot. And so God destroyed that city, both of those cities and the area around them, because those were people who were not seeking after him. But Abraham is an example to us of one who seeks after. So dive into those scriptures. In the description below, I will put more of the references to Abraham throughout the Bible. There's so many. And I won't catch all of them. You can use your concordance and go hunting. But it is an excellent exercise in threading Abraham's story into the tapestry that is this story that God is writing for us. For you to go make those connections between this event that happened with his son, and then what else is said about that event? How does God use that event to teach other people? And how is that event used to teach us? How is Abraham used to teach us? Connect those dots. Go from the story here and weave those threads together, because they're not separate moments. The observation far thousands of years in the future, looking back, they're things that are threaded together. So go connect those dots. And I hope that you will enjoy that story. We will finish up the world of Abraham with an episode on Ishmael, an episode on Melchizedek, and an episode on Abraham's servant. And then we will go into the world of Isaac. So watch for those episodes to come in the next few weeks. There will be a break between the world of Abraham and the world of Isaac once I get Ishmael and Melchizedek and Abraham's servant sent to you. So watch out for those. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you turn on notifications so that you are made aware whenever a new episode drops. Thanks for being here. Until next time, enjoy. Thanks for joining me today on the Diligent Woman podcast. Please subscribe to be notified of new episodes and share those with your friends. Until next time, enjoy.